Tonight's shiur is dedicated to the bar mitzvah, forthcoming bar mitzvah of my grandson, which is to be held Bez Hashem this Monday evening in New York. And if anyone knows a legal way how I can get there, please let me know afterwards. Meanwhile, we're very grateful for the occasion of the bar mitzvah, and that everyone is well, and Bez Hashem, we should have nachas from him in good health. As my participation for the celebration, I put together this is a paperback, not to be confused with the other sefer, which is a reprint of Nesivim B'Zdei Shlichus Chelik Aleph, which Bez Hashem will go to print shortly. This is a separate sefer. We've taken a lot of articles which have been written over the last 30, 40 years and put them together into a sefer. So that's what this is. And Bez Hashem will be reprinted and be available for the tzibur. So that's dedicated for the bar mitzvah, and still hopeful. I'm sure there will be some way to get there. But let's get on to this year. So I want to first be mashlim, make up for the discussion last week whether the Purim Suda on Friday has to be before Chatzos, or is it okay to be before Shor Asiris, which is the last quarter of the day. So I mentioned this briefly last week, and I had a bit more time this past week, the beginning of the week, to look into this more carefully. So if you have, let's say, a bris on a Friday, so the Ramo says you can make the Suda any time of the day. Magen Avraham and the Alter Rebbe says you should make the bris, the Suda of the bris, before the last quarter of the day, before Shor Asiris. That's what's written in Hilchos Shabbos. And here in Hilchos Purim, the Ramah says something about Baboiker, should make the Suda Baboiker. So where does it come from? When it comes in Hilchos Shabbos, they say that the cutoff time is the last quarter of the day, and here it should be Baboiker. And what do you have at the top of the page here is from the Sefer Ksos HaShulchan, from Reb Chaim Noah. And in Hilchos Shabbos, I think it's in Samach Tes, he says, the Mishnah Brura in Reish Mem Tes, he says, make a bris, better do it before Chatzos. Just like the Ramah says for Purim, which is on a Friday, do it before Chatzos. The same thing, you have a bris on Friday, do the Suda before Chatzos. So you can see here the Mishnah Brura, the Reb Chaim Noah addresses this. He writes here, because of Mishnah Brura, l'chatchila mitzvah l'hakdima b'shachris, as mentioned, Tofret Tzadik Hey, which is in Purim. To this, Reb Chaim Noah responds to the Mishnah Brura, and he says, Misudas Purim ein raya kol kach. The fact that by Purim, the Ramah says to do it by Boiker is not a proof that the bris has to be done before Chatzos. The Shani Purim, because the Purim Suda is more indulgent in wine, etc. The Chayiv lebesume bepurio, because there's the mitzvah to be intoxicated in Purim. You can't compare a semi-sober bris milah meal to a Sudas Purim, and that's why he's explaining why there are more instituted to do it before Chatzos. Although in Hilchos Shabbos we have a cutoff point of the last quarter of the day. He also agrees it's a good idea to have it in the morning, and he says, indeed, if you have a bris on Friday, you'd have it in the morning. So that is, so meanwhile we're seeing that what I had thought was that because the Alter Rebbe says the last quarter of the day for a bris, therefore the same for Purim. So he says, no, for Purim there's more reason to try to get it in the morning. Now, I'm going to confess that I did not get it in time for Chatzos. By the time I finished davening, by the time at least one Shlachimonis, and with a bit of Stamford Hill traffic, we covered Purim, so I didn't manage to start my meal before Chatzos. So if in case you are in the same predicament as me, so I'm just going to give you a bit of consolation, that on Purim, as Shushan Purim, the same kvias as this year in Tovshin Lamed Zayin. So the Rebbe says, Ich hab nechten geret mit Haiden. I was speaking yesterday with the Eid. I asked him, how come that it is on Friday? It is on Shabbos, the Rebbe speaking. On Friday, I spoke to someone, how come he's still not Adel Yoda? So he said, because Purim is on Friday, and the meal is in the morning, so that it shouldn't disrupt the preparations for Shabbos. Therefore, he's frightened to be Adel Yoda, because it's made from the Shulchan Aruch, in case he'll miss out something of the preparations for Shabbos. And then the Rebbe throws in, one should be making the Suda in the morning. Referring to Ramo. Man darf aber nicht medayik sein und gucken auf den See jetzt, ist es keinem Chatzos oder lache Chatzos, to be so worried whether it's a minute before Chatzos or a minute after Chatzos. So I just felt a little bit, so I didn't manage to get it for Chatzos. All right, so I aimed for Chatzos, Lepoil. I once heard Satmar Rov once said he would daven at, I don't know, very late. No, davening is 9 o'clock in the morning is Shachris. I sometimes felt slept for this, that, and the other. It was like being a standard thing. There was always delays. So anyway, we aimed for Chatzos, before Chatzos, and so all right, let's move on. Now, the next thing which I have on the list is the first item on the list. This was just a hashlama. This is making up for last week and a hemshach to Purim. So I got this question from someone who lives actually in Spain. And their next door neighbor, the kid sometimes throws the ball over it falls into their yard. Are they allowed to throw the ball back over the fence? So 2 points. Number one, if this might come as a surprise to some of you, there's no issur to pass over the fence to a goy if it's a goy's premises. The issur of carrying, let's explain this clearly. The issur of carrying from private to public or public to private, that is the issur of hoitzor and achnoso. That's the melocha min haTorah. To carry from private to private, from my house, my garden, to my next door neighbor, from one rishus hayochid to rishus hayochid, is the issur d'Rabbanan, and it's issur d'Rabbanan because of the lack of eruv. If I want to carry to my neighbor, I have to have an eruv with my neighbor, which is done with a loaf of bread, etc. And we have to have access. With a goy, there's no need for an eruv. And therefore, you are allowed to pass something over the fence to your goyish neighbor, and there's no isur haitzor, there's no chiyuv of eruv, and therefore there's no isur haitzor. I have my next door neighbor.
Isn't it only if the object belongs in the garden?
No, I'm going to come to that in a moment. No.
Okay.
No. This is with a goy. Now I have a next door neighbor is a goy, and so let's say I live number 37, and number 35 is a goy, and then there's a yid who's neighboring with him. Let's say, can I pass it over to my neighbor and then it goes to the yid? And the answer is no. That doesn't work. If the intent is to go from one Yisrael to another Yisrael, even that goes through a goyish reshus, that's not permitted, because ultimately there's no eruv between me and number 33 or 30, whatever it is. So that's not okay. But for me to pass something to a goyish neighbor there's no issur at all. No issur in the first place. Then there's a separate thing, and that is that even if it was a Yiddish neighbor, then we have a klal that kelim sheshovsu bechotzer, if at the onset of Shabbos that ball had been in the open air, then I'm allowed to pass it over the fence. So, for example, if I have a garden chair, which I leave in the garden, and I don't have an Eruv with my neighbor. Now there's an Eruv in Tottenham, so there's an Eruv by München gefragt. But then, let's say there's no Eruv with my next door neighbor. But if it's a chair which was left in, and when Shabbos came in, it was in the chotzer, I'm allowed to pass it over the fence to my neighbor, because anything which was left in the open air, the onset of Shabbos, so all open air Rishus HaYochids are considered one entity. So I am allowed to pass the chair over the fence of the neighbor, but he mustn't take it into the house. Okay. Let's go further. Reb Gershon, I'm going to ignore about the Poirus Mappa Mekadesh, because it's now, I think we're going to have to, we'll put it in the freezer for the next time we have to worry about it. Now, the Ari is pointing out if there is a chotzer where there are goyim and two yidden, has to be two yidden in the complex, and the goy. Once there's a shared, there's two types of need for a eruv. There is when we've got a shared common area, like in a block of flats. That's one form. Another form is when each one is a separate thing, or passing over the fence. For both, I need an eruv. If there is a shared area where there is a goy and two yidden, that's where we have a whole geschäft. We have to do schiras rishus. But if it's just passing over the fence, there's just me and the goy and no one else there, I don't need to have an eruv. And same thing if you live in a block of flats and there's 20 flats and you're the only yid who lives in the block of flats, you're allowed to carry in the whole building because there's no need for an eruv with a goy. If there's another yid, once you need an eruv, then you need an eruv, and then you need to have maschirus reshus, which is a whole performance. Let's move on. Okay. Here, Baruch Hashem is a shliach in a town somewhere in Europe, moved in a new apartment, and is asking this question. So he's asking this question about this archway. Now, I want to first, before I forget, that is that according to the Rambam, a doorway which does not have a door is potem in hamazuz. That's the Shittas Harambam. And because of that, because of the Shittas Harambam, when there's no door, just a doorway, we would put up a mezuzah, because other poskim disagree with the Rambam. We put up a mezuzah, we would not make a bracha. So that's just one little detail. The complication here is because of the archway. And so the minimum size of a doorway is 10 tfochim high and 4 tfochim wide. The question here is, as I'm pointing, the top the 4 tfochim towards the top. Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, can hear you.
Okay, so the top 4 tfochim, let's say that's the horizontal, that's the lintel. Question is, where does the vertical end and where does the horizontal begin? Or the other way around, where does the horizontal end and the vertical begin? And the question is because the mezuzah should be in the top third. So fortunately, I mean, he sent me exact measurements. Fortunately, he was able to put the mezuzah high enough that it should be, even if you'd say that the full height comes till it goes all the way till the top, it's still where it begins curving. is within the top third. So therefore, you could put the mezuzah within the top third, and perhaps just one tefach lower than when it starts curving. So here, we were able to resolve this. The problem would be if you'd have a curve starting much lower. And I've seen this in some houses where they've got a curved archway between, let's say, like a through lounge, and the curve starts very low. And that really becomes quite a headache, how to establish where to put the mezuzah, because we wouldn't want to put a mezuzah on the lintel, obviously. So that is a concern. But meanwhile, this one we were able to solve. Okay, one of our participants is asking a question. Apparently, the rabbi of a mainstream kehillah said it's perfectly within halacha to hear Megillah via Zoom, even to answer Amen to the brachas. Should read, told his congregants perfectly. Listen, what should I say? There's two issues. About answering brachas, I agree with him 100%. You can answer brachas, but to be yotze Megillah, according to the majority of contemporary poskim, not yotze, because it wasn't, because it's not from a human voice. Okay, Roman, thank you for your question. Which direction? Of course, when you've got such a doorway, you're going to have to establish which direction we're going, because the mezuzah has to be on the right side. And one of the simple rules which I follow is that you've got a more important room and a less important room. And the mezuzah, let's say, and I beg forgiveness for any of the housewives if they are offended, but between the kitchen and the dining room is the more important room. The kitchen is where the food is prepared to serve at the dining table. And as a result, if you had such an archway between the kitchen and the dining room, it would be on the right as you go to the dining room. Because let's say when your mechotanim come round, you bring them to the dining room, etc. All right, so that's one of the criteria. There are other criteria, and so if it comes up the question, of course, one has to discuss it, and there are various ways of addressing that. Now, the next question, interesting. This is from a different person, also a mezuzah question at the beginning of the week. And the mezuzah, so the mezuzah is in a kind of tube, and there's a rubber stopper. So here's to take out the mezuzah, to check the mezuzah, you just pull out, let's imagine if there's a test tube, which is somehow being held, and you pull out the stopper, you take out the mezuzah, and then when you check it, then you pop it back in. So then how you've done likboya mezuzah? If all you've done is, it could be inside, could be at the top. Imagine there's a slot. You just drop the mezuzah in. Is that called likboya mezuzah? And we've gone through this about using what's it called? This blue tack and things like that. It's not good enough. It has to be something which is like a permanent thing. But here you've got a permanent fixture, a permanent holder, and the mezuzah just drops in. So I wasn't really happy about that. But it turns out that this particular type is such a firm stopper that actually sometimes you wouldn't be able to remove it with your fingers. You'd have to use some kind of pliers, some kind of tweezers or something to pull it out. If that's the case, then that would be a definition of being fixed. If it requires, like in Hilchos Shabbos, if it requires gevura v'umanus, if it requires strength and skill, to be able to remove it, then that's called built-in. So in that case, that kind of stop, I think, was adequate. Right.
Can I just clarify? Are you saying that the actual mezuzah has to be fixed?
It has to be fixed
somehow.
Yes.
And not just resting in a cavity.
Yes.
Because I was in the old city after the 6-day war, a couple of weeks after the war, and I, went around and in the Jewish quarter, and I saw mezuzah in the walls, the stones. Niches.
Yes.
So they carved out a niche. They obviously just put the mezuzah in the niche and covered it.
Yes.
So it wasn't fixed.
Exactly. You can see Aria Freeman is commenting a very similar thing. The word which I'm saying here is there has to be some kind of, once the mezuzah is sitting snugly inside, then there has to be a pu'ula which makes it a permanent thing. It's not
So
just
by covering it.
by then you plaster over it. Yes, but plaster over, and in Brunei Yeshiva we also had that because when it was onto the main, the road of Petit Chateau, they often would be vandalized. So they had it built in, had a niche carved out, and there was a test tube, and then it was plastered over, and all you can see is the Shem Shin Dal Jud, and that's okay.
Right.
Okay, let's move on. Okay. Now a Pesach question, because it's Taka Shloshim Yom Lefnei HaChag. And so already before Purim, one of our listeners was anxious, I might not have enough shilas to cover for this evening. So he threw us a shilah. So his question was, he's got a next door neighbor who's loves who's oyev esabrios, including birds, and therefore puts out bread for the birds. But the birds are sometimes they get into a fight over the piece of bread, and as they get a fight, they're fighting with one another. Meanwhile, they drop the bread and it drops in his garden. So his question is, and then they forget about it. So now he's stuck with the bread in his garden. What's his responsibility for Pesach? So now let's learn a shtickle Shulchan Aruch. It's in Alter Rebbe's Shulchan Aruch and Siman Tov Memvav. Gagoy shel Nochri, shehoyo samuch legagoy shel Yisrael. You have a next door neighbor. You got a roof, a butt in your roof, and when Nizgal chometz migaga shel Nochri legaga shel Yisrael, some chometz has rolled from his roof to your roof. If it's Chalamoid or on Erev Pesach afternoon, you should kick it, push it. You shouldn't handle it. You should push it with a stick, push it back to him, to your neighbor, or you get a cricket bat and you kind of manage to throw it out into the street. But you shouldn't handle it directly. The worry is that in those days, in hot countries, they got flat roofs and they're often sitting there for recreation. So you might be sitting on your roof. There's that the roll which has rolled over from your neighbor, and you might forget, and it's Pesach, you might eat it. You shouldn't handle it directly. It should be a reminder. The fact that you have to use a stick and not handle it. Yeah, I know it sounds very far-fetched. We, Baruch Hashem, whenever we have bread, we buy it in wrapping, etc. We wouldn't dream of picking up a piece of bread from the floor. But, lifestyle has changed for the better in that respect. But that's what the halacha is. You wouldn't be allowed to handle it direct. You're not allowed to touch the chometz of a goy throughout Pesach. Avol, yeah, and just I want to throw in another thing. On the way to shul, there used to be a bakery, and you'd walk past. It smelled. You can smell every morning. You can smell the fresh bread. On Pesach, you're not allowed to consciously a geschmack. You're not allowed to consciously enjoy the smell of chometz on Pesach. So, but keeping to our point here, you're not allowed to touch the chometz of a goy during Pesach. If you are actually in the process of getting rid of destroying your own chometz, then you are allowed to handle it. You don't have to worry that you might come to eat it. If you are focusing on destroying it, you're not going to come and eat it. Now, let's finish off.
Just at this point about smelling,
that means you're not punishable for me'ilah, but it's still also. Yeah. Okay. So now, if it's on a day where you are allowed to handle it, so he said you should handle it indirectly with a stick. If it is on a Shabbos or Yom Tov, so then lo yitchel fender bekona. You're not allowed to move it with a stick either. Sharei metaltel muksa. That's called moving muksa. Interesting. I didn't look about it before. The Alter Rebbe in Hilchos Muksa disagrees with the Taz. The Taz says, let's say you got crumbs on the table, which are muksa. He says, if you move it with a knife, he calls that metaltel min hatzad. The tiltum min hatzad, he says you're allowed to. The Alter Rebbe disagrees with the Taz, and he says it's yoda arichta. Moving with a knife is not a heter. So here, I mean, I don't know what the Taz's position is over here, but the Alter Rebbe says you're not allowed to kick it with a knife, with a stick, because that's also moving muksa. Also talta muksa filo dedover acher, as discussed as Shiad. Yichbal of Kelly. All right, you can read further inside when he discusses. So if it's on Shabbos, you're going to have to cover it over until the end of Shabbos, end of Yom Tov, at which point you'd go and take it and destroy it. Right. Let's come back to the questions over here. So someone is asking, going back. So.
Reach lav nulse. Doesn't the Gemara say Reach lav nulse?
We've just said that already. That's not Mishnah Ger for Pesach. You're not allowed to. Pesach is similar to Avodah Zarah. Like Avodah Zarah is a Isur Mashu, same thing. Pesach is a Isur Mashu lachatchila. But the Avodah is all a different Atayrim, but lachatchila it's Isur Mashu. I remember once I was sitting with Diane Greenhouse, Shlita, and he had gone to some kind of factory, and it was for something for Pesach, and they were looking for every tiny speck, and the guy, the manager of the factory, he was like a little puzzled. What are they so concerned? So he said, I've forgotten what it was. There was a time when there was a whole scare. They were putting like powder into letters.
Anthrax.
Anthrax. Oh, so Ryan Greenhouse said to the manager, for us, chametz on Pesach is like anthrax. I think it's like, oh, jetzt verstehe ich. The guy said he understands. Okay, let's move on. Someone is saying here, asking most mezuzah cases are open and have a stopper at the bottom. It's putting that stopper into the case after sliding into the case, which is already fixed there. If the kitzur is, if it requires a degree of gevura v'umnus, that's called kviyas. If it's simple that you can just take it out without any gevura v'umnus, then I'm concerned of it not being kavua. Right, you're asking if the garden is fenced, it cannot be kicked or batted back. Right. That is a problem, and you're going to have to somehow indirectly. So you'll use a shovel or something and take it out of the house, and either throw it over the fence or get it out of the house. Right. Okay, we'll have to go into details about this later, about the stopper. Okay. Right. So the question about the second arch with shorter straight part, the midst of the mezuzah would go into the curve. That would be a serious problem, and yeah, I'm going to have to leave it for now. Okay, let's move on. Let's go on to a totally different topic, a totally different part of Shulchan Aruch, and that is that there's someone who's one of our listeners. He is considering to sell his house, and so the neighbors heard about it. Okay, so he's got now his next door neighbor is renting. So it's Reuven owns the house, and Shimon is renting. And in the Hamish areas, the houses are difficult to come by. So both the landlord and the tenant both are keen to buy the house. Now there is a halacha in Shulchan Aruch, a concept called dino de bar metzra, which means that the priority should be given when you want to sell a property. Priority should be given to a neighbor. The original halacha about this is talking about a field. In order to, if you've got two fields next to one another, so instead of having to schlep the equipment from one place to the other, you've got two fields, you can just schlep the equipment from one to the other. Some poskim say that Rabbeinu Tam holds that it doesn't apply to houses. But the halacha is not like the both poskim disagree with that, and they say that bar metzra does apply to houses. Although they say the reason why bar metzra applies to houses is because of the convenience that you are able to make an opening from one house to the other through the wall. You can join the two houses together, and therefore dinner de bar metzra applies to houses also. Okay, so that remains the halacha that it does apply. Here we've got two people. One is a tenant and one is a landlord. And so the question is, does either of them have priority over the other in the halacha of bar mitzvah? It's a fascinating halacha. This the din of bar mitzvah is so powerful that if you sold it to someone else, to not to a neighbor, that then the bar mitzvah would be able to kind of by bezdin force the buyer to sell it to him as the neighbor, obviously at the same price which that person paid. Okay, so now we have here a din in Shulchan Aruch Mishput Siman Kufayin Hey, and it's a long siman. As you see, this is Sif Samach, so it's quite a long siman. The majority of it talking about bar mitzvah. So we have here the mamish this question. Mishele yeshli bayis bischidus. So you have someone who's a tenant, or bayis she'etzle nimker, and next door is up for sale. Eino yochel lizkois boy midin ben hametzer. The fact that you are a tenant doesn't entitle you to have priority to buy the next door house. Furthermore, if a bona fide ben hametzer did buy it, then yochel l'salkoi. So let's say another neighbor had bought it, wants to buy it, and you, who is just a tenant, you had bought it. So the Shulchan Aruch says that that other person would be able to evict you in Bezdin because you're not an authentic ben hametzer. Now this is in the Rashi letters, that's from the Ramah. The Ramah says that no, that even as a tenant, you can also claim the privilege of priority because you're a neighbor to be able to buy it. So that's what the Ramah says. And so obviously the weight is more towards the landlord than to the tenant. I have one little problem, and to say the following. What's the reason for bar mitzvah? Because for another buyer, you can buy a property in another place. This location is not so important for you. You can buy another location. If you own a property next door, to have two properties next to one another, so then, and you can have the two working together. So that's a priority. That's the Lashon is v'osisa yoshev atov. We have there's a moral priority for you. You understand? If this tenant wants to buy this property, is he going to stay a tenant and join the two houses together, or he wants to move there? If he just wants to move there, so then I don't see why he's got the quality of Ben Hametzer. He could buy a house anywhere because the one-off moving, that's not the issue. It's the joining of the two properties. There's no intent to join the two properties. So why has he got a din of Ben Hametzer altogether? It could very well be that the halacha here, what the Ramah is talking about, is when the tenant wants to buy next door as well as remain a tenant over here. So I'm not sure, but at any rate, this is the halacha in Shulchan Aruch. The Chaber says the landlord has got the rights of Ben Hametzer and the tenant has nothing. The Ramah says the tenant does. Okay. He's saying he likes the position. Yeah, he likes the position. That's still it doesn't have the power. The power of Dinah Bar Mitzvah is because I own a premises right near here, right mamish next door. Therefore, the Chachamim gave a certain precedence. Let's read this question. If the next door neighbor is a property investor and has other properties, does this take priority over someone is buying in a house to live in? That's a very good question, because what you're asking is, where's the Asisa Vayoshev Atoiv? And I understand the moral dilemma here, because the owner, he's how do you say, he's a speculator. He wants to buy properties. And the tenant is desperate to find a roof over his head. I understand the sympathy on the other way. Yeah, I understand that. It could be though, if the next door neighbor wants to join the two properties into one large property, which does happen sometimes, then I understand that he has the dinner de bar mitzvah. If he just wants to have another property as an investment, then I don't understand why. Then I call upon him. I don't have the sympathies. I don't know what the halacha is. I don't know what happened in Bezdin, but I don't. He doesn't have my sympathy over the current tenant. Okay, but my sympathies don't necessarily have sway in Bezdin. Okay, let's move on. We had a discussion last week about double sinks. So one of our listeners, Reb Meir Zirkin, who lives in Western Florida, so he's not listening now, but he does get the recording and sends lots of helpful ha'oris. He's an Adim of Reb Tzin Hackner of Shalom. So he sent me two copies of two separate Sfarim, where they take a much more lenient view about the double sink. So here, this is from a sefer, as you can see, from it's called Bossa B'Cholov. And he writes here. I didn't copy the notes onto the screen, but kiyur kofel, a double sink, mitbach bal shnei kiyorim mechubarim, a double sink. Asu miksha achas. Well, we know that from these parashas, from Parashas Truma. Yeah, miksha achas is one piece of metal. Ein ze nechshav kekiyur echad leinyan zeh. Don't look at them as one sink. The one sink doesn't become also because of the use of the other one. And in the notes, he talks about the temperature and he talks about various things that, and I personally, I haven't checked this out. His question is, when one sink becomes very hot, is the other sink hot to touch? That you can't really hold. There's this concept called Yad Ledesbo, which means you touch it, you recoil. And I've never had the interest actually to start tampering with hot sinks to see. And so that's what he takes. I still think that Wasisa Hayoshev Atoiv and Midas Chassidus is Lefnim Sadin, you don't go into Shilas. I want to just mention a story. The Rebbe Rashab never had fillings. He never had fillings. He had toothaches, and he never had fillings, and he was worried. Same filling for Fleischiks, for Milchiks, for Pesach. So he never had fillings. And one time, the Rebbe had traveled to somewhere in Austria or some kind of spa for his health. At the same time, there was also there the Erloyerov. I think perhaps the name is Ehrenfeld, I don't remember now. And the Erloyerov was also there. And the Rebbetzin, the Rebbe Rashab's wife, she notices how this Rov from Hungary or whatever, but they got on very well with her. The way her husband, the Rebbe Rashab, was talking with this Erloya Rov, and so she was. She thought, she went to ask, "Can I have a private conversation?" And she spoke to the Erloya Rov, and she says, "My husband, he has Schmerzen, in Yiddish, Schmerzen is pain. He has tremendous pain from his teeth. He refuses to go to a doctor to have fillings, etc. So can you? I see that you've got a very good conversation with him. Perhaps you could persuade him that he should allow himself to have medical treatment and dental treatment." So he says, "I'll do what I can." The story was told over by Reb Tzvi Grimwald, who lived in Kfar Chabad, who passed away a few years ago. He heard it from the Erloy of himself, because he worked as a young man. He worked in the Moistus of Erloy in Yerushalayim. So he heard it from the Erloy of himself. So the Erloy of says to the Rebbe, he's going away, he was in the Birchas Preda. Meanwhile, he said, I heard that the Rebbe refuses to have a dental care, the dental intervention. And he says, I understand their concerns, but he uses in Hungarian Yiddish. It's a very remote concern, very far-fetched concern. And so the Rebbe told him that sometimes you have a shaila on a chicken or something, and you paskin it. It's a one-off shaila. But for me to live day in, day out with a chashusha, he repeated the same notion. For me to live day in, day out with a chashusha, I can't handle that. I'm saying this in the reference to the double sink. It's probably also a chashusha. It's quite remote. But if you're spending the money and putting in a sink, why do you have to have the chashusha? You may put two separate sinks and if you can't do it, then it's okay as it is. But let's move on. All right. So this is a question which I received from someone asking a question. Is it appropriate for a kala to give her chosen a gift? I think it's a very important yesod here. That's why I wanted to address it. A chosen and a kala are not related. They're not krevim. They're not cousins. They are two separate people. They're not. They're not. It's Hashem. They get married, of course. But meanwhile, they are two separate people, and there is the need, which of keeping that respectful distance until the moment where they get married. And so here we have. I'm looked here in the Sefer Nite Gavriel, and he says that the minig is that after the reading of the Tanoim engagement, so the chosen gives a matan to the kala. But he should be careful not to give it to the kala directly. He puts it down, and then, or he gives it through to the mother or his sister. So there is this kind of edelkeit of not giving something directly, out of that recognition that, of course, we are looking forward to have a wonderful relationship, but at this moment we are still not, we're still not married, and to respect that. I saw this also in others for him. There's a Chabad Sefer which I saw this also, because there is the developing closeness by Bez Hashem, all the more reason to have that kind of geder, that a gift is not directly from one to the other. It's a gift from the family, from the parents, whatever, etc. And so it just so happened to be that here the chosen had given the kala a present for her birthday, so she wanted to know she could give him a present for his birthday. So, all right, it should be like indirectly. That would be more correct. And it's now just coming from Purim. It comes to Shlachmonis. It says in Hilchos in Ramohia, V'isha tishlach li'isha, v'ish li'ish, avaloi v'hefech. Shlachmonis would be a woman to a woman and a man to a man. But a man should not be giving to a woman. And he says, it's like interesting, like he says, Shelo yovoi ish lishloich le'almono, yovoi l'dei svei kiddushin. If a man would give shlachmonos to a widow, then people might think that there's some element of kiddushin here, perhaps. So it seems to be a bit remote. But what we're seeing here is it's not appropriate behavior for a single man to giving to a single woman or a married woman, no difference. To be giving a gift directly seems to be inappropriate. So I just want to bring that up. Do you need a mechitza between two sinks? You should have a mechitza between two sinks, or alternatively, you can get a kind of lid. There are these kind of chopping boards which serve as lids, which are shaped to the size of the sink. And when you're doing the milchika dishes, so the fleishika sink is covered, and when you're doing the milchika sink is covered, etc. That would be an alternative to actually building a wall, which may not always be so practical. Thank you. You mentioned, Chaim Od mentioned about the engagement ring. The Rebbe took exception to giving engagement rings. And you have to understand a little bit more. And he also takes exception, and I'm mentioning this as a broad forum, the use of ploini or ploinis mo'orasim. In modern Hebrew, they use the word engagement, they use the word of erusin. Now, erusin is a very strong, that's kiddushin. If a couple of mo'orasim, if they break that engagement, they would, the erusin, it can only be, dissolved through a get. And so the Rebbe took exception to the use of the term mo'orasim. Bo b'kishtei shidduchin. In Chabad, you see, we don't use the term mo'orasim, we'll use the term bo b'kishtei kiddushin. Kishtei shidduchin. It's a long term instead of a short term mo'orasim, but to avoid now there's another thing. What does it mean, engagement? And let's take a look in the outside society. Why does a bride wear a ring? She comes one day to work or to college, and she has a ring on her finger. The ring is saying that I am committed to someone. So the word which kiddushin means, the osolo akule yalmo, the message of kiddushin, to say that I am committed to someone, and therefore I'm forbidden to everyone else, that an engagement ring is saying that. So, chas v'sholem, to say that it's mamish the same as kiddushin, but there is reason to keep away from it because we don't want to have a situation that it should be perceived as kiddushin, and therefore the Rebbe he discouraged the giving of engagement rings after the chasna. You can give 2 rings, but until the chasna, you can give bracelets and alle Sachen, but you can give chavdalet tachshitin, but keep the rings for afterwards. Okay. What else do we have here? We have 2 Pesach questions. One is, Erev Pesach is on Shabbos. When is the chametz sold? On Friday or on Shabbos? And I want to share with you. First of all, there is in the Rishimis, in the diary, the memoirs rather, of the Rebbe's mother, Rebbe Tzimchana, and she describes Erev Pesach, the sale of chametz by Reb Levik, by her husband, and she describes how tense he was to make sure that everything works out. And I just wanted to share with you, once you sell the chametz and you say to the guy, now it's all yours, and and you hand him the files and the key, whatever it may be, and now you can relax. It's all hakol shari v'kayom. It's all the guys, and you can walk away. That it can only be done on Friday. To make a mechira on Friday, it's not chal on Friday. It's going to go to chal on Shabbos. The whole mechiras chametz is, to a certain degree, it is what we call a haroma. It's kind of creating some kind of interesting however you want to translate the word haroma. It's binding, it's legal, etc. But after all, it has an element of haroma to it. Therefore, to counter that, we make it as shtick free as possible. And therefore, to say that there's a mechira not going to chal now, it's going to be chal on Shabbos, which is in itself a question whether you can have mechira chal on Shabbos, but it should be as seamless as possible. And therefore, I just want to say that's the way I'm going to do it, and that's what I've seen in Sfor. Sell the mechira. The mechira is done on Friday, and once I've sold it, it's sold. I must tell you, every year I get calls after this mechira is done, and most often it's nothing I can help them because it's you call me 2 o'clock in Erev Pesach afternoon, I can't help you. This year I will have a solution. If someone calls me at 2 o'clock on Friday, I'll tell them go to an American website and to American rabbi and put your details there, because he can sell it in America. It'll still be before Zman HaYisur. So this year we'll be able to, the latecomers will still have a Yeshua. Other years, you come 2 o'clock, there's nothing to be done. It's ready also Bahanoah, and you're going to have to just destroy it. I once had someone came to me Erev Pesach. He had forgotten to sell his chametz, and I said, you're going to have to burn it. So I thought, how much chametz you have Erev Pesach? You have actually a couple of Weetabix left. He happened to be a person who's into, natural foods, and he had a whole cupboard full of grain and this and that. What's coming on? Right. I just remember now as a kid, Manny Borsuk, Oliver Sholem. Baruch, you remember him, don't you? So he forgot to sell his chametz, and he had a whole cupboard, cocktail cabinet full of whiskey. And I remember, I didn't see it, but I remember it was Chazé Giret. He took the whole cupboard, one by one, all these whiskeys, and he poured it down the toilet, and that was what he did. Okay, he's Zichrei Baruch. And should women and dependent children say Kol Chamira? So I don't have Mar Mekomis, but what I remember from the past is that nowadays people have, even children, they have pocket money, and therefore they can buy something, so they can have a shtickle, they could have a shtickle chametz, and therefore it could be their own chametz. And therefore I would encourage that when you say Kol Chamira on Erev Pesach, on Shabbos, it's going to be check on the calendar, 11 o'clock ish, around that time, when you say Kol Chamira, let the women and the children, let them all say Kol Chamira. I have every year children coming, they have in their lockers in school, there's that. Let them say all Kol Chamira, it doesn't cost anything, and join in the bittul of chametz, and then they can say the Hirotzin, etc. One last thing which I want to share with you, and that is, this is a letter from the Rebbe, And in this is from Tovshin Mem Aleph, and he writes the so I'll go through the letter. Nocha inyan verbunden mit dem Purim speziell, something related to this Purim especially. When Purim kommt is Friday. When Purim is on a Friday, is in Yerushalayim ir HaKodesh, zieht sich Purim und wird nämlich bekam in Yonim in dem Sonntag noch dem. So the Purim kind of spills over also to Sunday. Sudas Purim, the tomorrow in Yerushalayim they're going to have Sudas Purim. Smechim besimchas Purim. That's for sure. You're going to see the celebration of Purim and Mishloach Monos Levaita. This actually is not so mafurish in Shulchan Aruch, but that's what the Rebbe is quoting here. That Mishloach Monos, because Mishloach Monos, according to some poskim, has got to do with the Suda. So if the Suda is on Sunday, so Mishloach Monos also on Sunday. So here the Rebbe brings an interesting thing. Gleich beim Oneb from Galus, nur dem ersten Beis Hamikdash, just after, by the beginning of Galus Bavel, after the destruction of the first Beis Hamikdash, habe Eden angenommen, sich keinmal nicht zu vergessen, Yerushalayim. Eden had resolved never to forget Yerushalayim. Gedenken ihr und ois heben ihr bei jeder Simcha. To mention, in every celebration, to remember Yerushalayim. That's you have the Ales Yerushalayim, or Rish Simchosi, etc. in Kapitel Kuf Lamed Zayin in Tilim. Wie David neim sie mir Yisrael sagt in Tilim. It's interesting. The Rebbe does not quote the Lashon of the pasuk in Al Naris Bavel. It just says that David mentions this, the idea of I will always remember Yerushalayim. Und erfahr, wollt gewinn passig und gut. Therefore, it would be fitting and would be good, gor good, very, very well, very good. As Eden umitum sollen dem Sonntag Yom Rishon Pashas Shmini, that this Sunday, the first day of Pashas Shmini, this year it's going to be Pashas, the first day of Pashas Kisisa, zugeben in mehrere Inyonim von Simcha. So this Sunday we should increase in aspects of Simcha, b'divrei Torah, welche seien doch mesamach lev, to increase in Torah, which is Torah is mesamach lev. So when you find time to learn extra Torah, you're busy, yeah? All right, so then you have a choice whether to wash the car this Sunday or next Sunday. So you'll wash the car next Sunday. This Sunday, you'll be meisiv in limited Torah. Mesameach sein Eden, mitech Avas Yisrael, and to gladden the hearts of Eden through Avas Yisrael, and oi pasik odernaitik. Interesting. Look at this lashon. Oi pasik odernaitik. If suitable or necessary, durch mishloach monos ishtel re'eu matonis lev yoinim. If you see the need, it's okay to give Mishloach Monos tomorrow, and Matonis Evyonim is okay. The Rebbe puts this he's quite careful. He doesn't want to institute a new thing that you give a chiyuv to give Shlach Monos or a minig to give Shlach Monos. But if in Pasik or the Noitics, I wanted to just say for myself, I went on Friday delivering Shlach Monos, and there was someone, I don't know who's listening here, someone I came to the house and rang the bell. There was no answer. I spoke to him on the phone. He wasn't in the area. He said leave it with the neighbor. There was no answer by the neighbor either. So I didn't leave the Shlach Monos. So Bez Hashem, tomorrow I will bring Shlach Monos to this person. I hope it will be appreciated, even though it's the day after. But I felt that's a suitable thing. And then the Rebbe adds, machen kinusim auf starke Yiddishkeit, to make, this is the Rebbe's main emphasis, I guess, to make kinusim and gather Eden together in a way of fortifying Yiddishkeit in Tech Yerushalayim, in a way, spirit of Yerushalayim. Yerushalayim means Yiddish Shlema, a complete, a whole fear, as Hashem, a fear of Hashem. So we have here Hiro of the Rebbe, that tomorrow there's still a little bit, kind of identifying with Yerushalayim to increase in Torah and to increase in Eden coming together. So I guess what we're doing now, Eden coming together, Baruch Hashem, we have here 82 people or 82 machines. Each machine can be more than one person. So we are gathered together, and so most of Zion. I would just want to add this idea of identifying with Yerushalayim. Al pi Arizal, Al pi Aloche, Simchas Torah has got to do with the fact that you're finishing the Torah. So in Chutz La'aretz, when do we finish the Torah? Simchas Torah. So therefore the Hakofis is Simchas Torah. When is Simchas Torah in Eretz Yisrael? Shmini Atzeres. Therefore Simchas Torah is on Shmini Atzeres. Then we have the Hakofis, the Shemini Atzeres. But then, Al Pi Arizal, in Eretz Yisrael, Motze Shemini Atzeres, they celebrate also Hakofis Shnias to identify with the Yidden in Chutz La'aretz who are celebrating Simchas Torah. Similarly, we in Chutz La'aretz, we celebrate the Hakofis, the night of Shemini Atzeres, to identify with the Yidden in Eretz Yisrael. So there we have this kind of a similar idea that to identify with the Yidden in Yerushalayim, so the Rebbe is encouraging Haisofer in Torah, etc. Someone's asking whether it's skipping Tachnun tomorrow. I want to just share with you. I have another minute. I'm a Talmud of Rabbi Heller. Rabbi Heller, he learned previously in Brisk, etc. When he came to Lubavitch, he went into the Rebbe Tichides, and he asked the Rebbe. There are certain aspects in mitzvahs where in Chabad they're more machmir. There are some things which in Chabad they're more more So, at what stage should he take on and switch over? So the Rebbe told him, first take on the chumras which are applicable in Chabad. Chabad are more machmir. Once you're comfortable with that, then you can consider of taking on the kulas of Chabad also. Okay, let's finish off look at the chats. The Manchester Bezdin has included with their contract with the goy that it includes even those who forgot to sell it. If they usually do it through them, I do that also. Also, anybody who's that's in my contract. I also have that lotion that the latecomers or who are usual. That's like the bakire kahuna. You're regular. I can't make a mechiras chometz for someone who has no connection with me. But someone who is a regular client, then I would be able to include him. And I've, unfortunately, I've had to rely on that in some cases where for some reason a form got lost, etc. And we've relied on that the mechira is including them. And sometimes there's the crisis, and so I realize and I put in the name even though they don't ask me, because just in case they'll forget, the name is included. Right. That's last thing here is the reason for not eating matzah from now due to taste. If so, what about those who eat only hand baked? And what about matzah crackers? And what about the jar chrein, which tastes more like beetroot? The chrein avada, I've never heard of people keeping off chrein for 30 days. With the machine matzahs, probably, and one also can, if necessary, one could be makel to use the machine matzahs and only be worried about the minig of not eating matzah from the matzahs with which you'll use to be mekayim the mitzvah. Versteht sich an erev Pesach mamish chas v'sholom to eat machine matzah. Because many fine Yidden are using that for Kiyam HaMitzvah, so Chas v'Sholom to be Motzilaz, and but otherwise, if necessary, you don't have the appetite, you don't have available regular bread, and you have only machine matzah, so I guess you can be makel on that. All right, something that contains fried. Don't worry. At the moment, the not eating matzah is purely on the level of minhag. And therefore, if it's mixed into your maybe the fish or fried, it's really not a worry. Rabbi Levitansky is asking, is there any value in selling the chametz of all the Yidden in my area who don't even know? Zochin le'odom. I know a lot of shluchim do that. And klapish maya galyas, koste garnished. You put in the list, and whether it's what would happen if in the middle of Pesach he'll become a Baal Tshuva. So I don't know what the answer will be. What is the difference between the minhagim of not eating matzah from Rosh Chodesh or from Purim? It's different kehillas. Some people have taken it on already from Shloshim Yom Kedem HaChag, where halacha that's already you have a duty to start gearing up, and some people start from Rosh Chodesh. I'm not sure why they start from Rosh Chodesh. Okay, I guess the heat is on a little bit more. Okay, I'll wish you everyone a guten Woch. And it was still in Adar, so it's still Marbin Besimcha, so it can be Marbin Besimcha, a whole of Adar, and Moisif V'hoilech, and alles soll sein gesund, and Suras Tevis, and Kol Tov.
Good work.
Thank you very much.